The war room smelled of old leather and bourbon at 2 in the morning. Marcus Blackwood spread his palms flat against the mahogany table studying topographic maps that might as well have been battlefield obituaries. 3 red pins marked where his wolves had died this week. 3 bodies left at the eastern ridge boundary, throats open clean, a message written in congealing blood. 48 years of living had carved lines into his face that no amount of supernatural healing could erase. The silver threading through his dark hair caught lamplight as he leaned closer to examine patrol routes, searching for the weakness Alpha Garrett had exploited. Finding it made his jaw clench hard enough that molars ground together. The gap in coverage lasted 17 minutes during shift change. 17 minutes had cost 3 lives. His wolf stirred beneath human skin, restless and hungry for retaliation. The predator inside wanted to cross that border, find Garrett's throat, and settle 30 years of territorial posturing with teeth and dominance. The king wearing human form knew better, knew that eastern ridges had been probing defenses for months, testing response times, measuring the strength of a pack ruled by an alpha who'd never taken another mate, never produced an heir, never built the legacy that made enemies think twice before bloodying his borders. The bourbon in his glass had gone warm. He drank it anyway, letting the burn chase down his throat, while his eyes tracked the pattern Garrett's wolves had established. Smart bastard. Each incursion pushed slightly deeper, a slow-motion invasion that could be dismissed as rogue activity, until suddenly it wasn't until the pattern became undeniable and the territory bled away in inches that became miles. Council had met yesterday. Warren Hayes, 65, and sharp as broken glass, had recommended negotiation. Offer Garrett trading concessions. Open the northern timber routes, appease the aggression with economic incentives that made invasion more costly than cooperation. Diana Pierce had agreed, her political instincts always calculating the path of least resistance. Robert Chen had stayed silent, which meant he'd vote with whatever consensus emerged. Marcus had listened to their counsel with the patience of a predator, watching prey debate which direction to run. Then he'd dismiss them without comment, which told him everything about what he thought of appeasement when wolves were dying on his land. The maps held no answers he didn't already possess. Strategy required resources he couldn't deploy without revealing the central weakness that had plagued his rule for 26 years. No heir meant no continuity, no dynasty, no reason for ambitious alphas in neighboring territories to respect boundaries, when everyone knew the Northern Rockies' throne would be contested the moment his heart stopped beating. Elizabeth's absence had carved a hole in his chest that 26 years couldn't fill. The mate bond had gone silent the night she disappeared, not severed by death, but muted by distance, a whisper of connection that told him she lived, but refused to come home. He'd searched for months, sent out hundreds of wolves, followed every lead, tracked every rumor of a blonde woman with healing hands, who moved through human territories like a ghost. They'd found her dress torn and bloodstained by the river. Found signs of struggle, claw marks and soil drag patterns that suggested rogues had taken her. The council had declared her dead. Traditional mourning lasted 6 months. After that, they'd started suggesting suitable mates, pure-blooded she-wolves from established lines who could give him the air pack stability demanded. He'd refused them all. Something in his wolf knew the truth his human mind couldn't accept. Elizabeth lived. Somewhere beyond his reach, beyond his protection, she carried his child and chose exile over the castle that should have been her throne. The knowledge had poisoned him slowly, made him brutal where he should have been wise, paranoid where he should have trusted alone, where he should have built alliances that could have secured the territory his absence of heirs left vulnerable. 3 dead wolves this week, 5 last month. Garrett was accelerating the pressure, sensing weakness, the way sharks sense blood in water. Marcus pushed away from the table, needing movement, before rage found an outlet in shattered furniture. His body shifted as he walked, bones reshaping under skin muscles, redistributing mass from human form to something older and infinitely more dangerous. Wolf form settled over him like a second skeleton, comfortable as breathing after 48 years of practice. The castle corridors blurred as he ran. Stone walls gave way to courtyards to the forest edge where sentries watched him pass with ears flattened in automatic submission. The Alpha was running his territory, and wise wolves stayed out of his path when that particular mood darkened his scent. Cold mountain air filled lungs that could process oxygen more efficiently than human tissue allowed. His paws ate distance in silent strides that covered ground faster than any human vehicle could navigate these slopes. The northern boundary called to something primal in his blood, the need to mark what was his defend, what he'd built, remind any challenger that this territory had been held for 3 decades by an alpha who'd killed every wolf stupid enough to test his dominance. The scent markers he'd left last week had been violated. Garrett's wolves had pissed over them, a deliberate insult that made Marcus's lips peel back from fangs designed to crush bone. He marked the trees again longer, this time more aggressive, the chemical signature in his urine broadcasting a message any wolf could read: cross this line and die. Evidence of the incursions littered the ground like accusations. Tracks that should never have penetrated this deep. Torn earth where wolves had fought. Dried blood that belonged to his pack mixed with trace amounts from Eastern Ridge's casualties. At least his wolves had made them pay for the territory they'd stolen. 3 pines bore fresh claw marks shoulder height for a wolf in battle form. Marcus studied them with hunter's eyes calculating size and reach. The marks belonged to different wolves, which meant coordinated assault pack tactics instead of rogue opportunism. Garrett wasn't sending throwaways to test defenses. He was deploying trained soldiers in a campaign that had military precision. War was coming. The only question was whether Marcus could secure his succession before it arrived. Dawn broke over the eastern mountains as he completed the circuit. 60 miles of boundary marked and reinforced every scent marker, refreshed with the concentrated aggression of an alpha defending his territory against inevitable invasion. His wolf form burned through calories faster than human metabolism, hunger gnawing at his belly, as he shifted back to skin and bone at the castle's edge. Captain Riley Hart waited at the tree line with clothes and a towel. 32 years old, 5'9" in human form, but 7 feet of muscle and fang. When she shifted to battle configuration, she'd served as his personal guard for 15 years, without once questioning orders or offering unwanted advice. Her eyes stayed carefully focused on the middle distance while he dressed professional courtesy between alpha and soldier that acknowledged vulnerability without exploiting it. Marcus pulled on jeans and a shirt that smelled faintly of castle laundry. His boots had been cleaned since yesterday, which meant Riley had anticipated his dawn run and prepared accordingly. The silence between them held comfortable familiarity born from years of shared duty. Riley handed him a thermos of coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint. He drank gratefully, letting caffeine chase away the exhaustion that came from running 60 miles on 4 legs in 3 hours of sleep. Riley's jaw worked like she was chewing words before spitting them out. Marcus waited. Whatever troubled his captain would emerge when she'd properly organized the thoughts into tactical analysis instead of emotional reaction. The forest around them stirred with morning activity. Wolves returning from night patrol, their forms fluid, as they shifted back to human skin for the walk through castle gates. Kitchen staff arriving before dawn to prepare meals for 600 pack members who lived within a 3-mile radius of the main structure. The territory waking up to another day of existing under threat they didn't fully comprehend because Marcus kept the worst intelligence confined to war room briefings. Riley finally spoke, her voice carrying the flat affect of someone delivering news they knew would land badly. Territory scouts confirmed activity at Dead Man's Pass. 30 wolves, maybe more, Eastern Ridge's scent markers. They're staging, not patrolling. Building supply caches. Digging in for sustained presence. The coffee in Marcus's stomach turned to acid. Dead Man's Pass commanded the eastern approach, a natural choke point that controlled access to the valley where most of his pack's agricultural operations fed 600 wolves through brutal mountain winters. Losing that position meant losing the capacity to sustain his territory without importing food through trading partnerships that required political capital he couldn't spare. How long have they been there? Riley's jaw tightened. 3 days, possibly 4. Scouts didn't want to risk close approach, not with those numbers. They waited for dawn confirmation before reporting. Multiple supply runs observed, which suggests they're planning extended occupation rather than raiding party setup. Marcus crushed the thermos in his fist, watching coffee drip between his fingers. The metal crumpled like paper, useless now, destroyed by anger that had nowhere productive to land. Garrett was moving faster than intelligence had predicted. The campaign wasn't building toward eventual confrontation. It had already shifted from probing attacks to territorial occupation. Triple the eastern patrols, rotating shifts, no predictable patterns. I want eyes on dead man's pass every hour of every day. If they're reinforcing that position, I need to know numbers, schedules, supply chains. Riley nodded, already calculating deployment rotations in her head. Her efficiency was why she'd earned the captain's position, despite being younger than half the wolves she commanded. There's something else. Marcus waited, knowing from her tone that whatever came next would be worse than Eastern Ridges establishing forward positions on his territory. Garrett's wolves have been asking questions. In the neutral territories, the trading posts where packs overlap. Questions about succession, about whether the Northern Rockies throne passes to council appointment if you die without direct heir. About what happens to territory claims when alpha lines fail. The words landed like physical blows. Marcus felt his wolf surge against human control, desperate to shift and tear into something, anything to release the rage building behind his sternum. Garrett wasn't just positioning for invasion. He was laying political groundwork for legitimacy, establishing the narrative that would justify conquest as restoration of proper alpha rule. Do they know something we don't? Riley's question carried layers Marcus didn't want to excavate. Did Garrett have intelligence about threats Marcus didn't see coming? Did someone inside the territory feed information to enemies who used it to calibrate their assault timing? Or was this simply the obvious calculation any ambitious alpha would make when observing an aging king without heir, without mate, without the biological continuity that secured dynasties? Marcus forced his breathing to slow his heart rate, to drop his wolf, to retreat from the edge of transformation that would accomplish nothing except demonstrate how close to losing control he'd drifted. Leadership required clarity, not blind rage. Strategy, not emotion. The capacity to see the battlefield as it existed rather than how he wished it looked. Tell the scouts I want updated intelligence every 6 hours. If Garrett escalates, I need advance warning measured in hours, not days. Riley's mouth opened like she wanted to say something, then closed as professional discipline overrode personal opinion. But Marcus knew her well enough to read the expression beneath the soldier's mask. She thought he needed to address the succession crisis before military threats consumed the territory. She was right, and he had no answer that satisfied either political necessity or the mate bond that still whispered Elizabeth's existence somewhere beyond his reach. The castle loomed against dawn sky, all stone and timber construction that had sheltered Northern Rockies alphas for 140 years. Marcus's grandfather had built the central keep. His father had expanded the wings that housed pack members who served in administrative or military capacities. Marcus himself had added nothing, maintained what existed, but created no legacy beyond survival, no improvements that would carry his mark into future generations. The weight of that failure pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Dismissed. Riley saluted and dissolved into the morning crowd, her presence vanishing the way good soldiers learned to move through packed territories without drawing attention. Marcus watched her go, then turned toward the war room where maps and bourbon waited with problems that had no good solutions. The gallery corridor passed under his boots an hour later. He'd showered, changed into clothes appropriate for meeting council, consumed breakfast that tasted like obligation instead of nourishment. The road to the council chamber took him past portraits of previous alphas, their painted eyes following his progress with judgment that existed only in his mind. His father stared from gilded frame with the confidence of a male who'd produced 3 sons before dying in battle at 62. His grandfather's portrait showed the weathered face of an alpha who'd unified 4 smaller packs into the territory Marcus now struggled to hold against external pressure. Elizabeth's portrait hung separate from the alpha's succession. Smaller frame, softer lighting, the only human face among generations of wolf rulers. The artist had captured something essential about her that photographs never managed. The strength beneath gentleness, the steel core wrapped in compassionate exterior, the healer who could set broken bones and negotiate peace treaties with equal competence. She wore the locket in the painting. Simple silver visible at her throat, the wolfsbane flower pressed inside glass that caught lamplight. Marcus had given her that locket the night he proposed, had told her that even poisonous flowers serve purposes, that even things the world feared could be beautiful. She'd laughed and accused him of talking about himself. The memory cut deeper than silver blades. 26 years, and the wound stayed fresh, bleeding, lost that had never properly healed because the mate bond refused to sever the way death should have ended it. She was out there, somewhere, alive but unreachable, and that uncertainty had poisoned every year since the night she vanished. Marcus forced himself past the gallery without stopping. Staring at portraits changed nothing, solved no problems, provided no tactical advantage against enemies who circled closer each day. The council chamber smelled of old wood and political compromise. Warren Hayes sat in his customary position, Diana Pierce to his left, Robert Chen to his right, the trinity of advisors who'd guided Northern Rocky's policy for decades. They rose as Marcus entered, formal courtesy that acknowledged rank without genuine deference. Marcus took his seat at the table's head, letting silence stretch, while his wolf assessed the room for threats. These were his counsel selected for wisdom and experience. These were also the voices who'd pushed hardest for him to remarry, to produce an heir through politically advantageous mating that would secure alliances and demonstrate vitality. Their advice had always carried subtext: a king who couldn't build dynasty didn't deserve the throne. Warren spoke first, his voice carrying the careful modulation of someone who'd spent 65 years navigating pack politics. Reports from the eastern border suggest Garrett is accelerating his timeline. The dead man's past occupation represents a significant escalation. We need to discuss response options before this situation deteriorates beyond diplomatic resolution. Marcus let the words hang unanswered, waiting to see how Warren would fill the silence. Watching advisors talk often revealed more than listening to prepared speeches. Diana leaned forward, her manicured hands folded on the table surface. We could offer concessions. Economic partnerships that make invasion less profitable than cooperation. The northern timber routes, perhaps. Access to our hunting grounds during winter months. Garrett's pack has struggled with food security. We could address his underlying resource crisis before it manifests as military aggression. The suggestion carried surface logic that collapsed under basic strategic analysis. Appeasement assumed rational actors motivated by scarcity rather than ambition. Garrett wasn't invading because his pack starved. He was invading because Marcus showed weakness and wolves respected strength over everything else. Robert Chen's contribution came quieter, more hesitant. There's also the matter of perception. The other territories watch how we respond to these provocations. Weakness invites additional challenges, but overreaction could trigger a coalition response if multiple packs decide we've become destabilizing influence. Marcus studied the three faces across the table, reading the currents beneath their words. Warren wanted negotiation because violence risked his personal position if pack leadership changed hands. Diana wanted appeasement because her daughter had alpha blood and she'd spent 26 years positioning for the day when Marcus finally selected a new mate from available candidates. Robert wanted caution because he'd spent his entire life avoiding commitment until consensus emerged. None of them wanted war. None of them understood that war had already started, was happening in slow motion, while they debated diplomatic solutions to military invasions. How many more wolves need to die before we acknowledge that Garrett isn't interested in timber roots? The question landed like accusation. Warren's expression flickered through calculation before settling on careful neutrality. We've lost 11 wolves in 6 weeks. Tragic, certainly. But military response risks hundreds more casualties. We need to exhaust diplomatic options before committing to actions that could devastate both packs. Marcus felt his control fray at the edges. Exhausting diplomatic options meant waiting while Garrett established supply lines, built fortified positions, moved from harassment to occupation. It meant reacting instead of dictating terms. It meant behaving like prey instead of predator. Garrett has occupied strategic position on our territory. He's asking questions about succession in neutral zones where pack politics get discussed. He's calculating whether conquering Northern Rockies is feasible before I die of natural causes, or whether he needs to accelerate the timeline with more aggressive methods. The silence that followed carried weight. Diana's face drained of color. Robert looked at his hands. Warren's jaw muscles worked beneath weathered skin. I'm not dying tomorrow. But I'm also not producing an heir from a political marriage designed to make council comfortable. Which means every ambitious alpha from here to the Pacific coast is watching to see if Northern Rockies can be taken by force. Warren found his voice first, though it came rougher than his usual polished delivery. Then perhaps we should discuss practical solutions to the succession crisis rather than focusing solely on immediate military threats. The two problems are connected. Resolving one addresses the other. Marcus felt his wolf surge forward close enough to the surface that his eyes probably flickered amber. The sensation of being managed by counsel who thought they could pressure him toward decisions he'd refused for 26 years made his teeth ache with the need to bite something. The succession crisis gets resolved when I say it gets resolved, not before. Not because Garrett thinks he sees opportunity, not because counsel thinks political marriage solves problems that have nothing to do with politics. Diana's hands trembled slightly before she clasped them tighter. Your Majesty, we're not trying to pressure you. We're trying to help you see the situation from multiple angles. The pack needs stability. The territory needs continuity. Without heir, without clear succession, we're vulnerable to exactly the kind of aggression Garrett is demonstrating. She wasn't wrong. Marcus hated that she wasn't wrong. The strategic reality couldn't be changed by force of will or alpha dominance. Facts remained facts regardless of how much he wanted to tear them apart with his bare hands. Meeting adjourned. Triple Eastern patrols. Prepared defensive positions at Dead Man's Pass approach. If Garrett wants that ground, he'll bleed for every inch. Warren opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. All three council members rose bowed and retreated with the careful speed of people who knew they'd pushed as far as safety allowed. Marcus remained in his chair long after they'd gone, staring at maps that showed territory bleeding away, while he had no heir to inherit what was left. The rest of the day passed in administrative tedium that made him long for the clarity of battle. Supply requisitions that required alpha approval. Dispute mediations between pack members who couldn't resolve conflicts without involving leadership. Reports from outlying settlements about infrastructure needs that strained budgets already stretched thin by increased military spending. By evening, his head throbbed with the kind of tension that came from hours spent managing bureaucracy instead of running forest as Wolfform demanded. The castle's stone walls felt like prison after dark, confining him when every instinct screamed to be outside, patrolling, defending, doing something productive instead of drowning in paperwork. He just decided to say fuck it and run the perimeter again when the knock came. Riley entered without waiting for permission, her face carrying the expression that meant bad news had gotten worse. Servants' quarters, 2 intruders, maybe more. Assassins. They went for the humans in the south wing. Marcus was moving before she finished speaking. Wolf form surged up through human skin as he ran body reshaping mid-stride until he hit 4 legs in real speed. Riley kept pace in human form, her longer strides eating ground almost as fast as his wolf could manage over short distances. The servant's wings smelled of cheap soap and fear. Marcus crashed through the door, hard enough to tear it off hinges, splinters flying as his wolf form exploded into cramped space where 30 human staff slept in bunks designed for half that number. Blood scent hit his nose like physical assault. 2 figures in black moved near the far corner where someone screamed. Marcus's vision narrowed to predator focus, identifying threats and eliminating them in the space between heartbeats. The first assassin went down with Marcus's jaws locked around his throat. Cartilage crunched. Blood sprayed hot across his muzzle. The body dropped before the second assassin could process what had hit them. The second one was faster trained than already spinning toward the window for escape. Marcus launched across 20 feet of floor in a single bound, caught the assassin's leg in his teeth, and bit down hard enough to shatter bone. The scream was satisfying but brief. He dragged the body back from the window, pinned it to floor, with claws that punched through leather armor into flesh beneath. Shift back happened fast. Marcus needed hands and voice for what came next. His human form crouched over the assassin, one hand wrapped around throat in a grip that restricted airflow to the edge of consciousness. Who sent you? The assassin's eyes rolled pain and fear mixing in expression that said he knew death waited regardless of whether he talked. Marcus increased pressure slightly, watching blood flow from the mangled leg pool across floorboards. Last chance. Who paid you to breach my castle and attack humans under my protection? The figure in the corner moved, small voice cutting through the predator focus that had narrowed Marcus's world to interrogation and violence. Mama Marcus's head snapped toward the sound. A child stood there, 6 years old, maybe blonde hair tangled from sleep, blue-green eyes wide with shock. She held a woman who bled from multiple wounds, trying to staunch flow with hands too small for the task. The woman's face turned toward lamplight, and Marcus's world tilted. Elizabeth? No, not Elizabeth. Younger, different. But the resemblance hit like freight train. Same bone structure, same eyes, same hair color. The woman wore a locket at her throat that caught light exactly the way Elizabeth's had in the portrait downstairs. Impossible. But his wolf knew before his human mind finished processing. Scent markers carried information visual assessment couldn't capture. The woman smelled like pack blood, like alpha lineage, like Elizabeth's genetic signature filtered through 26 years of separation. Riley appeared in the doorway survey scene with soldier's efficiency. She saw Marcus in human form, holding assassin by throat, saw the bleeding woman and terrified child in corner, saw three other bodies scattered across the floor from violence that had lasted perhaps 15 seconds. Medic, now, and bring silver chains. Riley vanished to execute orders. Marcus returned attention to the assassin pinned beneath his hand, rage building to something that transcended rational thought. One more chance. Who sent you? The assassin's lips moved, blood bubbling at the corners. Hayes. Counselor Hayes paid us. Said make it look like rogues. Kill the human and her spawn before anyone asked questions. Marcus's vision went red. His fingers tightened until vertebrae, compressed, stopped just short of crushing windpipe completely. The assassin would live long enough for proper interrogation for other council members to witness what happened to wolves who took Warren Hayes's coin and breached Pack Sanctuary to murder humans sleeping under Alpha protection. The child's voice cut through the haze, pitched with concern that had no business in a 6-year-old's vocabulary. Is the bad man going to hurt Mama? Marcus forced himself to relax his grip, to pull back from the edge, where his wolf wanted to rip spines out and paint walls with traitor blood. He stood slowly, giving the child space to process his presence without adding to trauma she'd already witnessed. Your mother's going to be fine. I've got the best healers in 3 territories. They'll take care of her. The child studied him with eyes too old for her face, like she could see through pretense to the truth beneath. Then her gaze dropped to the assassin on the floor, to the blood pooling around bodies Marcus had killed with efficiency born from decades of practice. You killed them fast. That was nice. Mama's been hurt for 3 minutes. Fast is better. The casual assessment of violence made something in Marcus's chest crack. This child had seen enough death to evaluate killing efficiency. She'd experienced enough trauma that rapid violence registered as mercy rather than horror. Whatever life she'd lived before arriving at his castle had taught her to calculate survival odds and appreciate predators who protected instead of threatened. Riley returned with 2 more guards and a medic carrying trauma kit. The medic dropped beside the bleeding woman, immediately assessing wounds with practiced hands that moved faster than human vision could track. Pack healers developed speed because wolves injured in battle required treatment before supernatural metabolism burned through damaged tissue. 19 stitches, maybe more. Deep lacerations, probable muscle damage. She fought them. Most humans freeze or run. She went for a knife. The information aligned with scent evidence Marcus's wolf had cataloged. The woman's hands carried defensive wounds. Blood under her nails suggested she'd scored hits against assassins who'd expected easy prey. She'd fought to protect her child while humans around her had either fled or died without resistance. The child stayed close to her mother, small hand gripping larger one, despite medics' attempts to move her aside for better working access. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just watched with focus that suggested she was memorizing everything for later analysis. What's your name? Sophie Morrison. That's my mama, Rachel Morrison. We've been here 3 months. We work in the kitchens because mama's good at organizing things and I'm good at counting. The matter-of-fact recitation carried zero fear despite the fact that a naked AlphaKing crouched 5 feet away in a room full of corpses. Sophie watched him the way experienced soldiers watch battlefield conditions, assessing threat levels and planning responses if situations deteriorated. Rachel Morrison. The name clicked through Marcus's memory, connecting to staff manifests he approved without close inspection. Human refugees hired 3 months ago when harvest required additional labor. Unremarkable. Invisible. Exactly the kind of people who move through packed territories without attracting attention until someone decided they needed to die. The medic worked fast, stitching wounds that would leave scars despite supernatural assistance. Rachel's eyes stayed closed, consciousness floating in and out, while her body processed trauma that would have killed normal humans through shock alone. But her hand never released Sophie's grip, maintaining contact even when awareness faded. Sophie looked at Marcus again, her expression curious rather than afraid. You smell like the forest, like pine trees and smoke. Are you the king everyone talks about? Yes. Her face brightened slightly like she'd solved a puzzle. That's good. The king is supposed to protect people. Mama said we'd be safe here. She was wrong about the safe part, but you killed them fast, so maybe she was right about the protection part. Marcus felt something crack wider in his chest. This child processed attempted murder with the practical acceptance of someone who'd learned early that safety was temporary and protection came from recognizing which predators would defend you versus which ones would eat you. The medic finished stitching applied bandages that wrapped Rachel's torso and stepped back to give Marcus space. She's stable, lost blood but nothing life-threatening. She'll need rest supervision, probably antibiotics to prevent infection, and she should be moved somewhere cleaner than servants' quarters. Wounds need proper environment for healing. Marcus stood ignoring his own nakedness because modesty meant nothing when surrounded by pack members who'd seen every alpha in multiple states of undress over years of service. Riley had already returned with clothes holding them out without comment while he dressed with efficient movements that covered skin quickly. Moved them to the royal wing, put them in the east suite, the one with adjoining rooms. Post guards on the door. No one enters without my direct authorization. Riley's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline, professional mask cracking slightly at orders that shattered protocol. The royal wing housed immediate family and highest-ranking council members. Putting human servants in those chambers would spark rumors that spread through packed territories faster than wildfire. Your Majesty, that's not negotiable. These two just survived assassination attempt in my castle. Someone paid wolves to breach pack sanctuary and murder humans sleeping under my protection. Until I know how deep the conspiracy runs, they're safer where I can personally guarantee their security. Riley nodded already, calculating guard rotations that could provide protection without advertising that something significant had shifted in pack hierarchy. She moved to organize the transfer while Marcus crouched beside Sophie again, bringing himself to eye level. We're going to move you and your mother somewhere more comfortable. Better beds, better security. You'll be safe there, I promise. Sophie's eyes studied his face with intensity that made him wonder what she saw. Then she reached out with one small hand and touched his cheek, her fingers cold against his skin. You look sad, like you lost something important and you're still looking for it. The observation drove straight through every defense Marcus had built over 26 years. This child saw too much processed emotional subtext that adults missed read him like text while he struggled to understand what the hell was happening. Her hand dropped away, and she tilted her head, expression shifting to something that looked almost dreamy. Mama says people who lose things sometimes find better things instead. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe the lost thing is coming back different than you remember. Marcus had no answer for that, no response that made sense. So he simply nodded and stood, letting Riley's guards lift Rachel onto a stretcher, while Sophie walked beside them, maintaining contact with her mother's hand, even as they moved through corridors toward the royal wing. The assassin Marcus had interrogated was chained in silver by the time he returned attention to immediate problems. The metal burned supernatural flesh, preventing healing and ensuring the prisoner stayed weak enough for transport. Two guards hauled the figure upright, supporting weight, while damaged leg dragged useless. Marcus leaned close, his voice dropping to register that promised suffering if answers didn't satisfy. You're going to tell me everything. Who hired you? How they contacted you? What other contracts they placed? Every detail, every conversation, every piece of intelligence you have about Counselor Hayes' activities. The assassin's eyes showed pain and fear in equal measure. And if I talk, you'll make it quick. If you talk, you'll live long enough for public trial. For the entire pack to witness what happens to wolves who betray their alpha. But I'll make sure the interrogation doesn't last longer than necessary. The promise of mercy wrapped around threat of prolonged suffering. The assassin sagged in the guard's grip, broken before Marcus had even started applying the techniques that would extract every useful piece of information from a mind already shattered by capture. Take him to the dungeon, Silver Restraints isolation cell. No one talks to him except me and Captain Hart. If he dies before I get what I need, you die with him. The guards paled but nodded, dragging their prisoner toward the stairs that descended into castle levels, where pack justice got administered away from witnesses who might object to necessary methods. Marcus stood alone in the servants' quarters, surrounded by bodies and blood that painted the floor in patterns his wolf could read like text. 2 assassins dead by his teeth, 3 human servants dead from wounds sustained before he arrived, Rachel Morrison bleeding from defensive injuries that said she'd fought instead of fleeing, and Sophie, 6 years old, and processing violence with the detached acceptance of someone who'd learned early that life was cheap and survival required recognizing which monsters would protect you. The locket around Rachel's neck had caught lamplight exactly the way Elizabeth's had 26 years ago. The resemblance between them went beyond coincidence into territory that suggested genetic connection. And if Rachel was Elizabeth's daughter, if she'd been born 26 years ago and raised in hiding while Marcus searched for a mate bond that never severed, then everything he'd believed about that night cracked open to reveal conspiracy that ran deeper than rogue attacks. His wolf growled low in his chest fury, building toward levels that would require physical outlet before it consumed him. Warren Hayes had hired assassins to kill a woman who carried Elizabeth's face, which meant Warren knew something Marcus didn't, which meant the council member who'd advised appeasement and diplomatic solutions had been playing longer game with stakes Marcus didn't fully comprehend. But he would. By dawn, he'd have answers. And Warren Hayes would learn what happened to wolves who thought they could plot against their alpha without consequences that ended in blood and broken bones. Marcus left the servants' quarters and headed for his private chambers, needing shower that would wash away blood and give him space to think clearly about problems that multiplied faster than solutions emerged. The castle corridors felt different now, infiltrated by enemies who'd breached defenses he'd considered solid. Someone inside had provided intelligence. Someone had told assassins which room housed human staff, which window could be accessed without triggering alarms, which hours offered best opportunity for penetration. Internal betrayal combined with external invasion meant Northern Rockies faced coordinated assault from enemies who'd planned campaign with patience Marcus hadn't anticipated. Garrett didn't just want territory, he wanted regime change, and council members who should have defended their alpha had apparently decided accelerating that regime change served personal interests better than loyalty. The shower water ran cold by the time Marcus finished scrubbing death from his skin. He stood under the spray until his body temperature dropped and his wolf retreated far enough that human thoughts could organize into actionable intelligence. Rachel Morrison was Elizabeth's daughter. The genetic resemblance, combined with age alignment and mysterious background that manifested in a woman showing up at his castle 3 months ago, made that conclusion functionally certain, even before proper verification. Which meant 26 years ago, Elizabeth had fled while pregnant, had hidden long enough to give birth, had raised their daughter in secret while Marcus searched for a mate he'd believed dead. The why mattered almost as much as the what. Elizabeth had been fierce loyal, brave enough to accept Luna's position, despite coming from human bloodline that made her target for purists who thought mixing weakened alpha genetics. She'd loved him. He'd felt it in the mate bond, in the way she looked at him, in the thousand small ways partners demonstrated commitment that transcended words. Fear had driven her away. Fear of threats he'd failed to see coming because he'd trusted council members who smiled to his face while plotting murder behind closed doors. Fear that had been justified, proven correct by the assassination attempt tonight that demonstrated conspirators would rather kill his daughter than let her claim rightful position as heir. Sophie Morrison presented a different puzzle. 6 years old meant conception happened 2 years after Elizabeth died. Rachel had apparently married human man, produced daughter, lost husband, to border wars that claimed human lives without making news. But Sophie's eyes had flickered amber when she touched him. Sophie's scent carried pack markers too faint for random genetics, too present to be coincidence. His wolf rumbled with possessive recognition. Granddaughter. Not confirmed yet, but instinct rarely lied about bloodline. If Rachel was his daughter, if Sophie carried alpha heritage diluted through 2 generations of human mixing, then succession crisis that had plagued his rule for 26 years had solution walking around his castle in a 6-year-old girl who evaluated killing efficiency and read emotions with supernatural perception. Marcus dressed in clean clothes and headed for the dungeons, where answers waited in silver-chained assassin who'd already confessed to Hayes' involvement. Interrogation would provide details. Public trial would provide justice. And then Marcus would deal with council members who'd betrayed pack trust in pursuit of personal agendas that ended with dead humans and a very angry AlphaKing. The dungeon air tasted of stone and old suffering. Marcus descended worn stairs that had seen 100 years of wolves confined below ground until judgment got rendered in forms that ranged from exile to execution. The assassin hung from chains bolted into ceiling toes, barely touching floor silver, burning through leather at wrists and ankles. Riley stood nearby, her face expressionless, despite the tools laid out on the table beside her, knives of varying sizes, silver implements designed to cause maximum pain without triggering supernatural healing. Methods that had been refined over generations of extracting information from wolves who thought they could resist alpha interrogation. Marcus picked up a blade and tested the edge against his thumb. Blood welled immediately, the wound healing within seconds as his metabolism processed minor damage. The assassin watched with eyes that already held defeat. Word count 8526. Target 18,000, 20,000. I'm going to ask questions. You're going to answer completely and honestly. Every lie costs you a finger. Every omission costs something else. We continue until I'm satisfied you've given me everything worth knowing, or until you run out of pieces I can remove without killing you. Do you understand? The assassin nodded, the motion barely perceptible through pain that already racked a body burned by silver restraints. Marcus moved closer, blade reflecting dungeon lamplight in ways that promised suffering. Measured in hours instead of minutes. Start with Warren Hayes. How did he contact you? What were his exact instructions? How much did he pay? The words came in broken gasps, interrupted by whimpers when Marcus applied blade to flesh that couldn't heal, while silver poisoned the assassin's system. 20,000 for the... Hayes said, make it look like rogues kill the woman and her daughter, quietly leave bodies. That would be written off as collateral damage from border tensions. He'd provided schedules, maps of servants' quarters, information about guard rotations that could only have come from someone with access to security protocols. How long has Hayes been planning this? Weeks, maybe months. He contacted us 6 weeks ago, said he'd have target information soon. We were supposed to wait for the go signal. It came tonight. Kill them before morning, before the situation could develop into something unmanageable. What situation? The assassin's face twisted with pain as silver continued burning through tissue that tried unsuccessfully to heal. I don't know, Hayes didn't explain. Just said the window was closing, that if we waited any longer, the targets would be under protection that made the job impossible. Marcus applied more pressure with the blade, watching blood flow across metal. Wrong answer. You don't take contracts worth 20,000 without understanding why the targets matter. Try again. The information came slower this time, extracted through methods that would haunt the assassin's nightmares if he survived long enough to have them. Hayes had mentioned succession concerns. Something about the woman carrying a bloodline that complicated his plans, about her existence threatening arrangements he'd spent decades building, about needing her dead before anyone discovered who she really was. Marcus felt the pieces click into place with terrible clarity. Warren had known for weeks, possibly months, that Rachel Morrison was Elizabeth's daughter, had tracked her, somehow, watched her arrive at the castle, recognized the threat she represented to whatever conspiracy he'd constructed over 26 years. And rather than let Marcus discover his lost daughter and heir, Warren had hired assassins to eliminate the problem before it undermined his position. What else did Hayes hire you for? What other contracts has he placed? Nothing yet, but he mentioned future work. Said if this job went well, there would be more. Something about a coordinated effort, multiple targets, timing that needed precision because windows were closing faster than expected. Garrett, the invasion. Warren's betrayal went beyond simple political maneuvering into coordinated campaign with external enemies. Hayes had sold out his own pack, had facilitated foreign invasion while simultaneously eliminating internal threats that might have strengthened Marcus's position. Marcus set down the blade and grabbed the assassin's jaw, forcing eye contact. How much does Garrett know? Is Hayes feeding him intelligence about our defenses, about our internal politics? The assassin's eyes showed truth, even as his voice cracked under strain. I don't know details. We're just contractors. But Hayes mentioned Eastern Ridges by name. Said timing was important because major moves were happening soon. Said after tonight's work, things would shift fast and opportunities wouldn't last. Riley's voice cut through the dungeon's oppressive atmosphere. Your Majesty, if Hayes is coordinating with Garrett, we need to assume defensive positions are compromised. Every patrol route, every supply cache, every strategic weakness we've identified, Hayes had access to that intelligence. Marcus released the assassin and stepped back, his mind racing through implications faster than words could articulate. Internal betrayal had opened Northern Rockies to invasion that wouldn't just claim territory, but could topple the entire pack structure. Garrett wouldn't stop at eastern borders if he had inside assistance and knowledge of every defensive weakness. He'd drive straight for the castle, eliminate Marcus' claimed throne through conquest that other packs would acknowledge as legitimate, because alpha rule passed through strength, not inheritance. Get council together. Emergency session, dawn. All three of them, no exceptions. And put Rachel Morrison under heavier guard. If Hayes tried once, he'll try again the moment he learns the first attempt failed. Riley nodded and departed to organize rapid response to crisis that had just expanded from manageable threat into existential danger. Marcus remained in the dungeon with the assassin extracting every remaining detail about Hayes' operations, about contact methods and payment structures, and other wolves who might be compromised by counselors' corruption. By the time he finished, the assassin was unconscious, body overwhelmed by pain and silver poisoning that would kill him within hours if not treated. Marcus left him chained and bleeding evidence that would be presented during public trial after other conspirators had been identified and neutralized. The castle's war room called to him despite dawn still being hours away. Sleep meant nothing when pack survival required planning that couldn't wait for proper rest cycles. Marcus spread maps across the table again, this time seeing them with new context that made previous strategies obsolete. If Hayes had fed intelligence to Garrett, then every defensive position was compromised, every patrol route known, every supply cache vulnerable to interdiction. The Eastern Territory could be lost before Marcus had time to reorganize around betrayal that had undermined months of careful preparation. But Marcus had advantages conspirators hadn't accounted for. Rachel Morrison existed alive and recovering in Royal Wing under guards who'd die before letting assassins breach again. Sophie Morrison existed 6 years old with alpha blood that would make her legitimate heir the moment Pac learned her lineage. And Marcus himself still lived, still ruled, still commanded loyalty from wolves who'd served him for decades without wavering. Hayes wanted regime change. Garrett wanted territory. Between them, they'd orchestrated a campaign designed to collapse Northern Rockies through coordinated internal and external pressure. They'd failed to account for the possibility that Elizabeth's daughter would survive, that the heir they'd tried to eliminate might be more dangerous than the aging alpha they planned to replace. Marcus smiled, and the expression held nothing warm or comforting. His wolf surged against human skin, eager for violence that would satisfy a primal need to protect Pac and punish traitors. Tomorrow's council meeting would crack open conspiracy that had festered for decades, and then the real war would begin. Word count 11,821. Target 18,000, 20,000. Dawn broke cold over the mountains, painting snow-capped peaks in colors that would have been beautiful if Marcus had spare attention for aesthetics. He'd spent the remaining night hours organizing a response to Hayes' betrayal, coordinating with Riley to lock down potential security breaches, reinforcing guard positions around vital infrastructure that couldn't be allowed to fall if Garrett escalated from harassment to full invasion. The Royal Wing stirred with activity as servants began daily routines. Marcus walked the corridors, checking on Rachel Morrison, finding her awake despite injuries that should have kept her unconscious through morning. She sat propped against pillows in a bed that dwarfed her frame, Sophie curled beside her like protective guardian, despite being the one who needed protection. Rachel's eyes tracked his approach with wariness that bordered on fear. Her hand moved instinctively to cover Sophie's body, maternal instinct overriding pain from wounds that had been stitched and bandaged, but still required days of healing. Marcus stopped several feet away, giving space that acknowledged her vulnerability without approaching close enough to trigger panic. Morning light through eastern windows illuminated the resemblance to Elizabeth with painful clarity. Same bone structure, same eyes, same way of holding tension in her shoulders while maintaining careful composure that suggested she'd learned to hide fear behind professional masks. "How are you feeling?" Rachel's voice came hoarse, strained by trauma that went beyond physical injuries. "Alive, which is better than the alternative. Your guards said we're safe here, that the men who attacked us are dead or captured. They are, and there will be trial, public proceeding, where the entire pack witnesses what happens to wolves who betray their alpha by attacking humans under his protection." She nodded slowly, processing information, while her hand maintained protective position over Sophie's sleeping form. The child's breathing came steady and even, exhaustion finally overcoming adrenaline that had kept her conscious through violence that would give adult nightmares. Marcus moved to the chair beside the bed, sitting carefully to avoid sudden movements that might startle prey instincts in a woman who'd just survived assassination attempt. He needed answers, but extracting them required building trust with someone who had every reason to view him as threat rather than protector. I need to know some things about your mother, about Elizabeth Ashford, about the locket you wear. Rachel's hand flew to her throat, fingers finding the silver pendant with automatic gesture that suggested she touched it frequently for comfort. Her eyes widened slightly, calculation evident as she connected pieces Marcus had already assembled. How do you know my mother's name? Marcus pulled the medallion from his own pocket, the one Elizabeth had worn in her portrait identical to the piece hanging around Rachel's neck. He opened it slowly, revealing the wolf's bane flower pressed between glass that had preserved it for 26 years. Because I gave her this locket, the night I proposed. She wore it every day until the night she disappeared. And you wear one exactly like it, which tells me things about your heritage that I suspect you don't fully understand. Rachel's face cycled through emotions faster than Marcus could catalog. Shock, fear, denial. Then calculation as her mind worked through implications the same way his had during the night's long hours. You're saying my mother was your wife, that she was the Luna. Everyone talks about the one who supposedly died 26 years ago. Not supposedly. Everyone believes she died because we found evidence that suggested rogue attack. Blood on stones, torn clothing, signs of struggle. The mate bond went distant but didn't sever, which should have been impossible if she died. But I thought maybe trauma had damaged the connection. I searched for months, never found her. Eventually accepted what counsel told me to accept, that she was gone and I needed to move forward. Rachel's eyes glistened, but she blinked back tears before they could fall. She never told me. Never explained where she came from or why we kept moving. Just said some secrets were dangerous, that knowledge could get people killed. She made me promise on her deathbed to never tell anyone where we'd come from, to always wear the locket, to keep hidden whatever bloodline I carried. The confirmation settled over Marcus like physical weight. Elizabeth had known the danger, had understood that council members who'd plotted her death would target her daughter if they learned she existed. She'd sacrificed everything, mate position, comfort, security, to keep Rachel alive, through hiding that lasted until her death 2 years ago. Do you know how she died? Rachel's voice went flat, reciting facts without emotion, because feeling them would crack the composure she'd built to survive in hostile world. Infection. We were living in a village 300 miles east. She got cut during a healing procedure. She was the local healer. People came to her when they were sick. The wound got infected, spread faster than human medicine could treat. She lasted 4 days. Told me stories about my father on the last night. Said he was good man, strong leader, that she'd loved him so much it felt like drowning. Said she'd had to choose between that love and keeping me alive, and she chose me. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Grief for Elizabeth's suffering mixing with rage at council members who'd forced her into exile that ended with her dying alone and afraid in village far from home. She deserved better. Deserved mate who protected her pack, that honored her life, that didn't end with infection because she lacked access to supernatural healing. I'm sorry that you lost her, that you grew up without knowing your father or your heritage, that you had to live in hiding because enemies I failed to see wanted you dead. Rachel's expression softened slightly, calculation giving way to exhaustion that went beyond physical injury. Sophie stirred against her side, small voice muffled by blankets. Mama, is the sad king still here? Marcus found himself smiling despite the grief that weighted every breath. Sophie's perception cut through pretense with child's honesty that adults spent lifetimes learning to disguise. Yes, the sad king is still here, and he's sorry for waking you. Sophie sat up, rubbing her eyes while blonde hair stuck out in directions gravity shouldn't allow. She studied Marcus with the same intense focus she'd displayed last night, reading him like text while he struggled to understand what she saw. You smell less sad now, more determined, like you found something you were looking for and now you're planning what to do with it. The observation was disturbingly accurate. Marcus had spent the night processing implications of Rachel's existence, of Sophie's strange abilities, of the conspiracy that had cost him 26 years with daughter he'd never known existed. Planning had replaced grief because emotion without action accomplished nothing. That's very perceptive, Sophie. Are you always this good at reading people? She tilted her head, considering the question with seriousness that belonged on adult faces. I can smell things, not like regular smells, more like feelings that have scents attached. Mama gets worried when I tell people, so usually I keep quiet. But you smell safe, and you smell like us, kind of. Like family, maybe. Marcus's wolf surged with recognition that confirmed what genetic resemblance suggested. This child carried his bloodline, carried alpha heritage diluted through Rachel's half-human genetics and whatever human had fathered Sophie, but present enough that her supernatural perception was already manifesting, despite her young age. Sophie, I need to ask you something important. Your father, the man your mother was married to, did you know him? Sophie's face fell, grief flickering across features too young to hold that much loss. Daddy died before I was born. Mama says he was a brave soldier who protected people, that he loved us even though he never got to meet me. His family blamed Mama when he died, said she distracted him, made him weak. They made us leave. That's why we move a lot. Rachel's voice came quiet, strained with effort to maintain composure while discussing husband who died 7 years ago. James was good man, human, no pack affiliation. He knew I was hiding from something, but never pushed for details. We were married 2 years before the border skirmish that killed him. I was pregnant when we got news. His family, they weren't kind. We left that night, been moving ever since, taking work where we could find it, staying ahead of questions. Marcus processed the timeline, calculating conception dates that didn't quite align with Rachel's story. Sophie was 6 years old. James Morrison had died 7 years ago, which meant if Rachel was telling truth, she'd given birth a full year after her husband's death. Possible but unlikely unless Rachel had remained pregnant longer than normal human gestation, or unless Sophie's father wasn't human. The thought crystallized with uncomfortable certainty. Rachel's scent carried human markers, but Sophie's supernatural perception suggested alpha bloodline too strong to be explained by diluted genetics through 2 generations. And if Sophie's father hadn't been James Morrison, Marcus kept his expression neutral, filing the discrepancy for later investigation. Right now, building trust mattered more than interrogating inconsistencies that might have innocent explanations. You're safe here, both of you, under my protection, which means anyone who wants to hurt you has to go through me first. And I promise you no one gets through me. Rachel's eyes held skepticism that suggested she'd heard promises before, had seen them broken often enough that words meant less than actions. But she nodded, acknowledging his statement, even if she didn't fully believe it. Sophie scooted to the edge of the bed, legs dangling over the side, while she studied Marcus with focuses that made him wonder what her supernatural perception revealed. Can I ask you a question? Of course. Why is Mama's picture in your castle, the one in the gallery with the pretty frame and the flowers around the edges? Marcus felt his heart stop. He'd seen Rachel's resemblance to Elizabeth, hadn't considered that portraits might be close enough to trigger recognition from child who'd never met her grandmother. That's not your mother's picture. That's my wife, my Luna, the woman who disappeared 26 years ago. Her name was Elizabeth. She looked very much like your mother because Rachel is her daughter. Sophie's eyes went wide, processing information that rearranged her understanding of the world. So Mama is a princess, and that makes me, what, a princess too. And something more. You carry alpha bloodline, which means you have abilities most humans don't possess. The way you can sense emotions and read people, that's not normal. That's supernatural perception inherited from wolf genetics. Cool. The single-word response carried such genuine enthusiasm that Marcus found himself laughing, despite the crisis spiraling through his territory. Sophie's acceptance of her heritage demonstrated remarkable adaptability, or possibly just 6-year-old inability to fully comprehend implications. Rachel's voice cut through the moment, sharp with concern. Your Majesty, if what you're saying is true, if I'm really your daughter, then we're in more danger than before. Those men who attacked us, they knew, didn't they? They knew who I was, and they tried to kill us before you could find out. Yes, and the conspiracy runs deeper than 2 assassins. Counselor Warren Hayes hired them. has been working with enemies who want my territory, who see my lack of heir as opportunity. Your existence threatens his plans, which is why he moved fast to eliminate you. Then we should leave. Tonight. Disappear the way my mother did. Keep moving until number 'em. The word came hard, carrying alpha command that brooked no argument. Rachel's eyes flashed with irritation at being ordered, but she stayed silent while Marcus continued. Your mother ran because I failed to protect her, because I trusted council members who plotted murder while smiling to my face. She sacrificed everything to keep you alive, and I won't dishonor that sacrifice by letting you flee again. We fight. We expose the conspiracy. We claim your rightful position as heir and make it impossible for enemies to touch you without declaring war on me directly. Rachel's jaw set with stubborn determination that reminded Marcus painfully of Elizabeth. And when they declare war anyway, when Garrett invades and Hayes stages coup and we're caught in the middle, then we'll drown them in their own blood. Because I've spent 26 years alone compromising, making decisions based on political necessity instead of protecting what matters. I failed your mother, I won't fail you. The declaration hung between them, heavy with commitment that went beyond tactical assessment into emotional territory Marcus hadn't occupied since the night Elizabeth vanished. Rachel studied him with calculating intensity, measuring sincerity against decades of broken promises. Sophie broke the tension with characteristic directness. Mama the King is telling truth. His scent doesn't lie. And I think we're safer fighting with him than running away from everything. Rachel closed her eyes, conflict evident in every line of her body. When she opened them again, exhaustion had won over skepticism. Okay, we stay, we fight. But if this goes wrong, if your enemies get close to Sophie, I won't hesitate to take her and disappear. Princess or not, she's my daughter first. Understood. Marcus stood, giving Rachel space to process while his mind raced ahead to council meeting that would happen within the hour. Hayes would attend expecting business as usual. Would walk into chamber anticipating continued deception. Would discover instead that his conspiracy had been exposed and his life now measured in hours instead of years. The anticipation tasted sweet. Riley found him in the war room 30 minutes before scheduled council session, her expression grim. We've got problems. Garrett's forces at Dead Man's Pass increased overnight. Scouts count 200 wolves now, maybe more. They're not just staging, they're fortifying, building permanent structures, preparing for extended occupation. Marcus absorbed the information without visible reaction. Hayes must have sent word after hiring the assassins. Told Garrett to move fast because window was closing. The coordinated timing suggested planning that went back weeks or months. How long can we hold if they push past Dead Man's Pass? Riley's jaw clenched. Depends on how many resources they commit. With 200 wolves, they could reach Castle within 3 days if we don't establish defensive lines that force them to bleed for every mile. With internal betrayal compromising our intelligence, I'd say we have week, maybe less, before this turns into full siege. Word count 15,385. Target 18,000, 20,000. Marcus nodded, already calculating deployment that would slow Garrett's advance without committing so many resources that Castle defenses suffered. Split the difference. 100 wolves to eastern positions fortify the choke points between Dead Man's Pass and Central Territory. Make them pay for ground they take. The rest stay here, defend the castle, ensure Hayes and any other conspirators can't stage internal coup while we're distracted fighting external threat. Riley saluted and departed to organize rapid deployment that would happen within hours. Marcus remained in war room studying maps that showed territory being squeezed between external invasion and internal betrayal. 2 fronts, coordinated assault. Enemies who'd spent years planning campaign that exploited every weakness in aging Alpha without heir presented. They'd failed to account for Rachel Morrison surviving long enough to reach his castle. Failed to predict that assassination attempt would fail. Failed to recognize that exposing conspiracy might be the strategic mistake that turned coordinated campaign into chaotic rout. The council chamber filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Warren Hayes sat in his customary position, expression carefully neutral, despite the fact that his hired assassins had been captured and interrogated. Diana Pierce fidgeted with papers on the table, nervous energy that suggested she sensed the room's atmosphere had shifted in dangerous directions. Robert Chen kept his eyes down, avoiding contact that might require him to choose sides before understanding what sides existed. Marcus entered last, letting silence stretch while his wolf assessed threats, and Riley positioned herself near the door in case violence became necessary. He took his seat without preamble, pinning Warren with stare that promised suffering for crimes about to be exposed. Last night, assassins breached castle security, penetrated servants' quarters, murdered 3 humans, and attempted to kill 2 more before I intervened. The attackers wore no pack markers, carried silver weapons, demonstrated training consistent with hired contractors rather than rogue opportunists. Warren's face remained blank, but his sense spiked with adrenaline that Marcus's enhanced senses cataloged as fight-or-flight response. Diana paled. Robert looked genuinely confused, which suggested he hadn't been part of this particular conspiracy. One assassin survived. We interrogated him. He confessed to being hired by council member who paid $20,000 for the contract, who provided detailed intelligence about castle layout, guard schedules, and target locations, who specified the murders needed to happen immediately because a window of opportunity was closing. The room's temperature dropped as implications landed. Warren shifted slightly, calculation visible behind eyes that measured exits, and assessed whether he could reach the door before Riley's guards blocked his path. The assassin identified you, Warren, by name, provided payment details, described multiple meetings where you coordinated timing with external partners who are currently staging invasion at Dead Man's Pass. Warren stood slowly, his chair scraping against stone floor. Your Majesty, this is ridiculous. Assassins will say anything under torture. You can't, seriously, I can seriously do whatever I want at council members who hire mercenaries to murder my daughter and granddaughter in my own castle. The declaration hit like concussion wave. Diana gasped. Robert's head snapped up. Warren's face cycled through shock before settling on rage that confirmed guilt better than confession. Your daughter. You have no daughter. Elizabeth died childless 26 years ago. Everyone knows Elizabeth fled while pregnant because you and your conspirators plotted to kill her. She heard you discussing how to eliminate the human problem before it produced heir that would threaten your political arrangements. She ran that night, gave birth in hiding, raised my daughter in poverty and fear, while you pretended to grieve, and I wasted decades searching for mate who'd been driven away by traitors sitting in this room. Warren's control shattered. His wolf surged forward, eyes flickering amber, as supernatural rage overwhelmed human composure. You can't prove any of this. One assassin's testimony means nothing without corroboration. And even if some human woman claims to be Elizabeth's daughter, there's no way to verify Rachel Morrison is 26 years old. Carries genetic markers that match Elizabeth's bloodline. Where's the locket I gave my Luna the night we became engaged? And most importantly, she survived your assassination attempt because I happened to be nearby when your contractors breached security. Marcus stood his own wolf, pressing against skin with enough force that his body temperature spiked and the air around him rippled with heat. The contract you placed specified killing her and her daughter before anyone discovered their existence, before I could acknowledge them, before the succession crisis you've exploited for 26 years could be resolved by legitimate heir who doesn't require your blessing or political maneuvering. Warren's hands clenched on the table edge hard enough that Wood groaned. You're destroying the pack with this madness. Acknowledging some human refugee as heir will spark rebellion. The purists will never accept. The purists will accept what I tell them to accept, or they can challenge me directly and die. Same choice you have now. Warren, confess your betrayal, provide names of every wolf involved in conspiracy with you, and I'll grant you instead of execution. Refuse, and I'll spend the next week extracting information through methods that will make last night's interrogation look gentle. Diana found her voice shrill with panic. Your Majesty, Warren's loyalty has never shut up, Diana. Unless you want to explain why you've spent 26 years positioning your daughter to become my Luna. Why you've blocked every political alliance that didn't benefit your family. Why you attended meetings where council members discussed how to handle the Elizabeth problem. Her face went white. Marcus felt savage satisfaction at watching conspirators realize their plans had unraveled, that the isolated alpha they thought they could manage had caught scent of betrayal and wouldn't stop until every traitor faced justice. Robert Chen's voice came quiet, almost apologetic. I wasn't part of this. The assassination, the conspiracy with Garrett. I swear on my life you were complicit through inaction. You sat in meetings where policies got discussed, heard implications, chose to stay silent rather than warn me that council members plotted against their alpha. Robert's head bowed in acknowledgement. Then I'll accept whatever judgment you render. I was weak. I was afraid. I should have spoken up decades ago. The admission earned him nothing except Marcus's contempt. Weakness was expected. Fear was understandable. But choosing personal safety over pack loyalty made him accomplice to crimes that had cost Elizabeth everything and nearly killed Rachel before Marcus could discover her existence. Guards entered at Riley's signal, silver chains ready to restrain conspirators who'd just been exposed. Warren tried to shift desperate gamble to fight his way out of chamber and flee before capture became execution. Marcus moved faster, crossing distance in blur of motion that human eyes couldn't track. His hand closed around Warren's throat, mid-transformation, squeezing hard enough to prevent breathing, while his other hand punched through partial wolf form into flesh beneath. Warren's eyes bulged. His hands clawed at Marcus's grip without finding purchase against strength that came from decades of alpha dominance. You plotted against my mate, drove her to exile, that ended with her dying alone. Tried to murder my daughter and granddaughter because their existence threatened your political games. And you coordinated with foreign alpha who's currently invading my territory because you thought regime change served your interests better than loyalty. Marcus's grip tightened incrementally, crushing trachea, while he watched life fade from eyes that had smiled and advised and plotted murder for 26 years. It would be easy to finish it now, to end the threat permanently and display Warren's corpse as warning to other conspirators. But pack law required public trial, required witnesses who could confirm justice rather than assassination. He released Warren's throat at the last possible second, letting the council member collapse to floor, gasping for air that came in ragged wheezes. Guards moved in with silver chains securing wrists and ankles, while Warren's partial transformation reverted to human form, too weak to maintain wolf configuration. Diana tried to run, made it 3 steps before Riley's hand closed on her shoulder, with grip that promised broken bones if she resisted. The female council member collapsed into sobbing that held no dignity, no courage, just fear of consequences, finally arriving after decades of escaping justice. Robert stayed in his chair, accepting restraints without protest, while his expression showed relief that burden of conspiracy had finally been lifted through exposure. Marcus returned to his seat, forcing heartbeat to slow and Wolf to retreat from violence that threatened to consume rational thought. The satisfaction of exposing betrayal mixed with rage at 26 years, stolen by traitors, who smiled while they undermined everything he'd built. Riley's voice cut through the chamber's charged atmosphere. Your Majesty, what do you want done with them public trial? Dawn tomorrow. Entire pack assembled to witness proceedings. Present evidence testimony from captured assassin. Everything we've gathered about their conspiracy with Garrett. Then let pack justice determine whether they live or die. Warren's voice came as damaged croak. You'll regret this. Garrett has 200 wolves at Dead Man's Pass. While you're busy with show trials, he'll be marching on your castle. You need council unity to face external threat, not internal purges that weaken. I need loyal wolves, not traitors who sell intelligence to enemies. Garrett knows our defensive positions because you told him. Knows our patrol schedules because you provided them. Every advantage he has comes from your betrayal. So yes, I'll regret many things. But exposing your conspiracy isn't one of them. The guards dragged all 3 council members from chamber, their protests fading down corridor toward dungeons where they'd await trial that would end in exile or execution. Marcus remained seated long after they'd gone, processing the rapid escalation that had transformed manageable crisis into existential threat. Riley approached cautiously. Sir, with respect, we're in bad position. Garrett's forces outnumber our available defenders. Hayes's intelligence has compromised our strategic planning. And now you're committing to public trial that will consume resources and attention while invasion force advances. I know. Then what's the play? How do we win this? Marcus looked at maps spread across the table, seeing territory that might be lost and pack that might be destroyed if every decision went wrong. But he also saw Rachel Morrison surviving assassination attempt. Saw Sophie Morrison reading emotions with supernatural perception that marked her as alpha-blooded despite human appearance. Saw chess pieces moving into configurations that conspirators hadn't anticipated. We announce Rachel's existence tonight, before trial. Emergency pack assembly. 600 wolves gathered to witness their alpha acknowledge his lost daughter and legitimate heir. Make it impossible for anyone to claim succession. Crisis leaves us vulnerable. Riley's eyes widen. That's bold, maybe too bold. You haven't verified paternity, haven't given pack time to adjust to existence of half-human princess. Dropping that announcement while we're under invasion will demonstrate strength. We'll show Garrett that conquest won't result in easy transition of power because legitimate heir exists and carries support of current alpha. We'll force any internal dissenters to choose sides before they can organize resistance. And if they choose wrong side, then we'll know who the traitors are before they can act. Better to force crisis now while we still control timing than wait for conspirators to coordinate their assault. Riley absorbed the strategy, calculating risks against potential benefits. It could work, or it could trigger civil war at exactly the wrong moment. Either way, it's not boring. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. Boring died the moment assassins breached his castle, targeting women who carried Elizabeth's face and bloodline. Now they'd play the hand fate had dealt, win or lose, but play it aggressively instead of defensively. Make the announcement. Emergency assembly tonight 2 hours after sunset. Mandatory attendance for every wolf within 5 miles of castle. I want absolute confirmation that Rachel is my daughter before standing in front of 600 wolves claiming her as heir. Already ordered blood testing this morning. Results should be available by afternoon. And Rachel's agreeable to the announcement she will be. Because hiding doesn't work. Her mother tried that for 26 years and still ended up dead while enemies hunted her daughter. Time to stop running and start fighting. Riley saluted and departed to organize assembly that would reshape pack hierarchy and possibly trigger the civil war she'd warned against. Marcus remained in war room alone, surrounded by maps and plans and threats that multiplied faster than solutions emerged. But for the first time in 26 years, he felt something approximating hope. Rachel Morrison existed. Sophie Morrison existed. His bloodline continued despite conspirators' best efforts to eliminate it. And if he could leverage their survival into political advantage that neutralized internal threats while simultaneously deterring external invasion, maybe Northern Rockies would survive the coordinated assault that should have destroyed everything he'd built. The afternoon passed in frantic preparation. Blood tests confirmed genetic relationship between Marcus and Rachel, with probability that satisfied even skeptical pack scientists. Riley organized security for assembly that would put 600 wolves in confined space while invasion force massed at eastern borders. Medical staff cleared Rachel for limited mobility, despite injuries that required another week of healing under normal circumstances. And Sophie stayed close to her mother, quiet and watchful, occasionally offering observations that carried disturbing accuracy about emotions and intentions of people around her. Marcus visited the royal wing as sunset approached, finding Rachel dressed in clothes borrowed from pack members, since her own wardrobe consisted of servants' cast-offs, unsuitable for public appearance as crown princess. The midnight blue dress with silver embroidery had belonged to Elizabeth, preserved for 26 years, in hope that never quite died despite evidence suggesting it should have. Rachel studied her reflection with expression that mixed disbelief and resignation. I look like her, like the portrait in the gallery. Is that why you're doing this? Because I remind you of her. Marcus met her eyes through mirror reflection. I'm doing this because you're my daughter. Because Sophie is my granddaughter. Because Pac needs heir and I need family. The fact that you carry your mother's face is reminder of what I lost. But you're not Elizabeth. You're Rachel. And you'll make your own choices about what kind of leader you become. Rachel turned to face him directly. What if I'm not strong enough? What if the pack rejects me because I'm human? What if then we'll deal with those problems as they arrive? But running accomplishes nothing except delaying inevitable confrontation. Your mother ran for 26 years. It didn't save her. Won't save you or Sophie either. Only way forward is through. Sophie appeared in doorway connecting the two chambers, wearing smaller version of Rachel's dress that had been hastily altered by castle staff with supernatural sewing speed. She looked impossibly small and fragile, 6 years old, and about to be presented to 600 wolves as future alpha. Do I look okay? Mama says I need to be brave. That people will be watching and judging, and I can't show fear even if I'm scared. Marcus knelt to bring himself to Sophie's eye level woman. Fear is natural. Fear keeps you alive. The trick is not letting fear make your decisions for you. Feel it, acknowledge it, then do what needs doing anyway. Sophie studied him with those two perceptive eyes. You're scared too. I can smell it. But you're doing this anyway because it's right thing to do. The observation cut through pretense with child's honesty that adults learn to disguise. Yes, I'm terrified. Of failing you both. Of losing you the way I lost your grandmother. Of making wrong choices that cost lives I swore to protect. But leadership means carrying fear without letting it paralyze you. Sophie nodded seriously, then wrapped small arms around his neck and hugged that surprised him with its fierce intensity. Thank you for being brave enough to be scared. Mama says that's what real courage looks like. Marcus returned the embrace, carefully aware of how fragile human children were compared to wolf cubs who could survive rougher handling. When Sophie pulled back, her expression had shifted to determination that looked alien on 6-year-old face. I'm ready. Let's go show them who we are. The great hall filled with 600 wolves whose combined scent created olfactory assault that would have overwhelmed human senses. Marcus stood at the raised platform with Rachel on his right and Sophie on his left, three figures silhouetted against the massive fireplace that heated stone chamber against mountain cold. Riley had arranged security with paranoid efficiency, guards positioned at every entrance. Perimeter patrols tripled. Every wolf in attendance had been screened for weapons and silver. Though Marcus knew determined assassin could kill with bare hands if motivated enough. The assembly fell silent as Marcus stepped forward. No preamble, no diplomatic buildup, just direct statement of facts that would reshape everything. 26 years ago, Luna Elizabeth disappeared. Council told me she died. Evidence suggested rogue attack. I searched for months without finding her. Eventually accepted what I was told, to accept that my mate was gone and I needed to move forward. His voice carried through hall with alpha command that prevented interruption. 600 pairs of eyes watched him with varying degrees of curiosity, concern, or calculation. 3 months ago, a woman named Rachel Morrison arrived at this castle seeking work. Human refugee with 6-year-old daughter. Unremarkable. Invisible. Exactly the kind of person who moves through packed territories without attracting attention. She worked in our kitchens, kept her head down, raised her child quietly. Last night, assassins breached castle security, attempted to murder Rachel and her daughter before anyone could discover their true identity. The assassins were hired by Counselor Warren Hayes, who provided intelligence and payment to contractors tasked with eliminating a threat to political arrangements he'd maintained for decades. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, wolves processing information that suggested internal conspiracy reaching highest levels of pack leadership. Why would Hayes want Rachel Morrison dead? Because she's not just a human refugee. She's Elizabeth's daughter. My daughter. Blood tests confirmed genetic relationship with probability exceeding 99%. Rachel Morrison is Rachel Blackwood, Crown Princess of Northern Rockies, legitimate heir to territory and title. The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, denials, arguments, breaking out in clusters, as wolves struggled to process revelation that shattered assumptions about succession crisis that had plagued Pack for 26 years. Marcus let the chaos continue for 30 seconds before imposing silence with alpha command that cut through noise like blade through flesh. Every wolf in the hall felt the weight of his authority compulsion to submit that transcended conscious resistance. Rachel Blackwood has survived 26 years of exile that her mother chose to protect her from conspirators who would have killed her in infancy. She's raised her daughter alone after losing her husband to border wars. She's worked as servant in this castle for 3 months without complaint or expectation of special treatment. Last night, she fought assassins with kitchen knife to protect her child, sustaining injuries that would have killed normal humans through shock alone. He paused, letting the litany of Rachel's survival establish credibility that pure bloodline couldn't provide. And her daughter, my granddaughter Sophie Morrison, carries alpha blood strong enough that her supernatural abilities are already manifesting despite her young age. She has perception that reads emotions and intentions. She has instincts that warn of danger before it arrives. She has bloodline that marks her as future of this pack. Marcus reached out, taking Rachel's hand in gesture that combined support with political statement. This is my daughter. This is my heir. Anyone who challenges her right challenges me directly. Anyone who threatens her safety declares themselves enemy of Northern Rockies and will face justice appropriate to that betrayal. The silence that followed carried weight of 600 wolves processing ultimatum that left no room for ambiguity. Accept Rachel or challenge Marcus with all the consequences that implied. A voice called from the crowd. Young male Marcus recognized as Cole Brennan, ambitious wolf who'd been positioning himself as potential successor if Marcus died without producing heir. With respect, AlphaKing pack law allows challenge right. If she claims to be princess to be heir, she must prove herself worthy through trials any challenger must. The legal citation was accurate and impossible to ignore without undermining pack law that governs succession. Marcus had known this moment would come, had prepared for it, but hearing the challenge voiced aloud still made his wolf surge with protective fury. Rachel's hand squeezed his, her voice quiet enough only he could hear. What kind of trial, combat trial or wisdom trial? You choose which one proves your worth. Rachel looked at Sophie, then at the 600 wolves watching her with predatory focus. She released Marcus's hand and stepped forward, her voice steady, despite the fact that she faced down a pack of supernatural predators while nursing injuries from assassination attempt. Combat trial, dawn tomorrow. I accept any challenge from wolves who think they can lead better than Elizabeth's daughter. The hall erupted again, this time with surprise that human woman would accept combat trial against wolf challengers. Cole's expression showed shock before settling into grim determination. He'd issued challenge she'd accepted, and now honor demanded he follow through, even though killing Crown Princess would earn him death sentence, regardless of whether trial rules allowed it. Marcus wanted to intervene, to refuse the challenge to protect Rachel from violence that could kill her. But doing so would undermine her claim to leadership, would suggest she needed alpha protection rather than being capable of standing on her own merits. So he stayed silent and watched his daughter commit to trial by combat that might cost her life less than 24 hours after he'd discovered her existence. The assembly dissolved into chaos as wolves debated implications and challenges multiplied. Marcus escorted Rachel and Sophie back to Royal Wing through corridors that buzzed with tension thick enough to choke on. Sophie spoke first, her small voice carrying absolute certainty. Mama's going to win. I can feel it. The bad smell people are scared now because everything's changing and they can't stop it. Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that 6-year-old's precognition would prove accurate. But combat trials were brutal affairs, and Rachel's human limitations made victory anything but certain. Tomorrow would determine whether his bloodline survived long enough to inherit kingdom currently under invasion from external enemies and undermined by internal betrayal. Tomorrow would prove whether Rachel Morrison could transform from refugee to warrior to crowned princess through force of will and combat prowess. Tomorrow would show whether Marcus's gamble of acknowledging his heir publicly would save Northern Rockies or accelerate its destruction. He had no choice but to watch and pray that Elizabeth's daughter had inherited more than just her mother's face. Dawn arrived with the kind of cold that made breath visible and turned stone floors into ice beneath bare feet. Rachel stood in the armory while Riley Hart strapped leather armor across her torso, the material offering minimal protection against claws designed to tear through steel, but better than facing a wolf with nothing but skin and hope. The injuries from 2 nights ago pulled tight beneath bandages that restricted movement she'd need for the trial. 19 stitches across her ribs. Defensive wounds on her forearms that ached every time she raised her hands. Pain that would slow her reactions when speed meant survival. Sophie sat nearby watching with focus that belonged on battlefield commanders rather than 6-year-old children. Her eyes tracked every buckle Riley fastened, every blade Rachel tested for balanced cataloging information that would matter if her mother didn't return from the trial alive. Riley's voice came quiet enough that only Rachel could hear over the sounds of castle waking to witness combat. You don't have to do this. Marcus can invoke alpha protection, declare the challenge invalid, because you're still recovering from assassination attempt. Rachel tested the weight of a silver dagger, feeling how the blade wanted to drop point first toward vulnerable targets, and lose every ounce of respect before I've earned any. No, I accepted the challenge. I'll see it through. Cole Brennan's good fighter. Trained since he could walk. He'll be faster, stronger, more experienced. The only advantage you have is that he won't want to kill you, Bad politics to murder the crown princess during sanctioned trial. Then I'll make sure he regrets his restraint. Riley's expression flickered with something approximating respect beneath the concern. Elizabeth used to say the same thing, right before she'd do something completely insane that somehow worked anyway. The comparisons settled over Rachel like inherited mantle. Her mother had survived 26 years of exile through combination of intelligence, adaptability, and willingness to do whatever survival required. Those same traits lived in Rachel's blood, had kept her and Sophie alive through poverty and persecution that should have broken them. Today she'd proved that Elizabeth's daughter could fight for her birthright instead of running from it. The outdoor arena filled with 600 wolves arranged in concentric circles around sand-covered ground where blood would soak in fast enough to keep footing stable. Marcus stood at the edge in formal regalia that marked him as referee and AlphaKing, his expression carved from stone that revealed nothing about the terror Rachel knew churned beneath the surface. Sophie sat beside him in a chair built for someone 3 times her size, legs dangling over the edge, while she watched proceedings with supernatural focus. Her small hand rested on Marcus's forearm, offering comfort that transcended age through connection that pack blood enabled. Cole Brennan entered from the opposite side wearing no armor at all, because wolves healed too fast for leather to matter, and clothing just restricted transformation. His body rippled with muscle that came from decades of training, scars visible across his chest and arms that told stories of previous battles won through superior strength and speed. He shifted as he walked, human form flowing into wolf configuration that stood 7 feet tall on hind legs with claws that could disembowel with single strike. Battle form sacrificed the 4-legged speed of full wolf for the reach and tactical flexibility of bipedal combat. Rachel stayed human because she couldn't shift, had no access to supernatural strength or healing that would level the playing field. Just human flesh and determination that her mother's sacrifice wouldn't end with her daughter dying in trial designed for creatures built for violence. Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying alpha command that silenced ambient conversation. Trial by combat. First blood wins, but death is permitted if unavoidable. Both fighters have accepted terms. Begin when ready. Cole circled right, testing Rachel's reactions, while his clawed feet dug furrows in sand. She matched his movement, maintaining distance, while her mind calculated angles and vulnerabilities that strategy might exploit where strength couldn't compete. He lunged without warning, closing 20 feet in blur of motion that human eyes barely tracked. Rachel dropped and rolled left, feeling displacement of air where his claws passed through space her torso had occupied. Her hand came up with silver dagger, scoring shallow cut across his thigh as momentum carried him past. First blood to her, but not enough to end the trial. The rules required wounds significant enough to demonstrate dominance, not just lucky scratch, that drew token amounts of blood. Cole spun faster than physics should allow, his backhand catching Rachel across the shoulder and sending her tumbling through sand that abraded exposed skin. She rolled with the impact instead of fighting it, using momentum to create distance before he could follow up with killing strike. Pain exploded through her ribs, where stitches tore open fresh blood, soaking bandages beneath armor that hadn't protected anything. Rachel forced herself upright, breathing shallow to minimize the agony that threatened to overwhelm tactical thinking. The crowd roared approval at Cole's hit-pack dynamics, favoring the wolf who demonstrated superior combat ability. Rachel ignored them, focusing instead on the pattern she'd observed during his attack. He committed fully to each strike, using overwhelming force that left brief windows of vulnerability when momentum carried him past his target. She feinted left and dove right as he charged again, her dagger opening a deep gash along his rib cage that would have been fatal if she'd had supernatural strength to drive the blade between bones. As it was, the wound bled freely, but would heal within minutes once his metabolism processed the silver. Cole howled, more rage than pain, his combat discipline cracking under frustration that human opponent refused to die quickly. He grabbed for her throat with clawed hand that could crush vertebrae, desperate now to end the fight before accumulated damage shifted pack perception of who was winning. Rachel caught his wrist with both hands, using his momentum and her body weight to redirect the grab into throw that sent him crashing face first into sand. She landed on his back with both knees, drove her dagger through the muscle of his shoulder and twisted. Cole screamed. The blade pinned him to ground through joint that wouldn't heal properly while silver poisoned the tissue. Rachel leaned close to his ear, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear over the crowd's shocked silence. Yield or I sever the tendons. You'll never fight again. His body went rigid beneath her, trapped between instinct to continue fighting and tactical assessment that told him she'd won through strategy where strength had failed him. His wolf form flickered, losing cohesion as pain overwhelmed the concentration required to maintain battle configuration. Rachel pulled the dagger free and stepped back, giving him space to make the choice that would define whether he lived as warrior with honor or died as cautionary tale about underestimating human opponents. Cole shifted back to human form, naked and bleeding in the sand, his voice carrying through arena with defeated acceptance. I yield. She fought with more honor than I showed. The trial is hers. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats before erupting into chaos. Half the pack howled approval at combat that had exceeded expectations. The other half argued among themselves about whether human victory proved anything except that Cole had held back out of political considerations. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise with authority that transcended debate. Rachel Blackwood has won trial by combat through skill, strategy, and courage that honors her mother's memory. Any wolf who wishes to challenge her claim may do so now, or accept her as crown princess with all rights and privileges that title demands. No one moved. The silence carried weight of 600 wolves processing the reality that Elizabeth's daughter had just defeated trained warrior through combination of intelligence and absolute refusal to surrender. Rachel walked toward Marcus and Sophie, each step sending fresh pain through torn stitches and bruised ribs. Blood soaked through her armor in patterns that would leave scars to match the ones her mother had earned during her own trials. She reached the platform and looked up at Marcus with expression that mixed exhaustion and triumph. I'm going to need a medic and probably another 20 stitches, but I'd appreciate if we could handle the rest of today's business before I pass out. Marcus's eyes held pride fierce enough to burn. Welcome home, daughter. You've earned your place here. The medic worked quickly restitching wounds while Riley organized the next phase of proceedings that would determine traitors' fates. Warren Hayes, Diana Pierce, and Robert Chen were brought from the dungeons in silver chains that had burned their skin raw during 3 days of confinement. Warren's defiance had cracked under interrogation that extracted every detail about his conspiracy with Garrett. Diana had broken faster confession, spilling from her in desperate attempt to earn mercy that wasn't coming. Robert had simply accepted his guilt, too ashamed to mount defense for cowardice that had enabled murders. Marcus stood before the assembled pack with 3 conspirators chained at his feet and evidence of their betrayal documented in testimony from captured assassins and correspondence seized from Warren's chambers. The trial proceeded with mechanical efficiency, each piece of evidence building case that admitted no interpretation except deliberate treachery. When time came for sentencing, Marcus surprised everyone by looking at Rachel instead of rendering judgment himself. You're the one they tried to kill. You're the heir they wanted to eliminate before Pack could acknowledge your claim. The right to judge them belongs to you under Pack law. What's your verdict? Rachel stood despite the fresh bandages wrapping her torso despite exhaustion that threatened to drop her where she stood. She studied the 3 conspirators who'd driven her mother into exile, who'd stolen 26 years from her father, who tried to murder her and Sophie in the middle of the night. Pack law offers death or exile. I choose exile for Warren Hayes and Diana Pierce. They plotted murder and betrayed their alpha, but Robert Chen gets different sentence. The crowd murmured confusion as Rachel approached Robert, stopping close enough that he had to meet her eyes. You followed them out of fear instead of conviction. I understand that kind of weakness because I lived with it every day my mother was alive. Always running, always hiding, always afraid. But fear doesn't absolve you of responsibility for the damage your inaction enabled. She paused, letting the words settle over silence that had fallen across the arena. You want redemption? Spend the rest of your life making amends. Serve this pack with the loyalty you should have shown decades ago. Prove that cowards can become heroes if they're given the chance. Robert's eyes glistened with tears he didn't try to hide. I will. I swear it. Everything I have, everything I am, belongs to serving the heir I should have protected from the beginning. Marcus's hand found Rachel's shoulder, his voice carrying approval that transcended words. The sentences are rendered. Warren Hayes and Diana Pierce will be escorted to the border and exiled permanently. Return equals death without trial. Robert Chen will serve Crown Princess Rachel in whatever capacity she determines appropriate. This matter is concluded. Guards dragged Warren and Diana from the arena while they shouted protests that no one acknowledged. Robert remained kneeling in the sand, silver chains removed so the burns on his wrist could begin healing. His submission was absolute broken wolf who'd found purpose through judgment that offered redemption instead of destruction. Riley appeared beside Marcus, her expression grim with news that couldn't wait, despite the emotional weight of the last hour. Sir Eastern scouts report Garrett's forces are moving, 200 wolves advancing from Dead Man's Pass toward the Central Valley. They'll reach defensive lines within 3 hours. The invasion that had loomed on the horizon had finally arrived in earnest. Marcus's jaw tightened as tactical considerations replaced emotional processing. How many defenders do we have in position? 100 wolves at the choke point, another 50 in reserve. Against 200 trained soldiers, we're looking at casualties exceeding 50%, even if everything goes perfectly. Rachel's voice cut through the tactical discussion, despite the fact that standing upright required concentration that left her swaying. Then we need to change the equation. Make this about more than straight combat where numbers determine outcome. Marcus looked at his daughter with expression that mixed concern and curiosity. What are you suggesting? Negotiate? Offer Garrett something that makes invasion less profitable than alliance. He's not attacking because he hates us. He's attacking because he sees opportunity in your succession crisis. But that crisis just got resolved. I'm acknowledged. Sophie's acknowledged. The pack has accepted us. So what's his motivation now? Territory, resources, revenge for perceived insults. The usual reasons wolves go to war. Rachel shook her head despite the way movement made her vision swim. Those are pretexts, not motivations. Garrett needs something we have. Food security, access to trade routes, breeding population to strengthen bloodlines that are thinning. Warren mentioned Eastern Ridges hasn't had Alpha Prime birth in 30 years. Sophie's existence proves our bloodline is strong. That's leverage. Marcus studied her with intensity that suggested he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about her capabilities. You want to offer him alliance? After he invaded our territory and killed our wolves? I want to offer him reason to stop invading before more wolves die on both sides. Make him an ally instead of an enemy. Use diplomacy where force would just cost lives without achieving lasting peace. The strategic reasoning aligned with Elizabeth's approach to leadership, combining pragmatism with compassion that recognized enemies could become assets if properly motivated. Marcus had spent decades ruling through strength and dominance. His daughter was suggesting path that required different kind of courage. Riley arranged meeting with Garrett under flag of truce. Neutral ground between his position and ours. Tell him AlphaKing Marcus Blackwood request negotiation before this escalates into casualties neither side can afford. Riley's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline, but she nodded and departed to organize diplomatic mission that violated every instinct trained soldiers possessed about dealing with invading forces. The meeting happened at sunset in clearing equidistant between defensive lines and Garrett's advancing forces. Marcus brought Riley and 20 guards. Garrett arrived with similar retinue, his massive frame radiating aggression barely contained beneath diplomatic pretense. Alpha Garrett, thank you for agreeing to negotiate instead of forcing this into bloodbath that serves neither pack's interests. Garrett's lip curled in expression, hovering between sneer and genuine amusement. You're surrounded, undermined by internal betrayal facing invasion force that outnumbers your defenders 2-1. What exactly do you have to negotiate with? Rachel stepped forward despite Marcus's protective instinct to keep her behind him. The fact that you came suggests you are interested in what we're offering. Otherwise, you'd have kept advancing and taken your chances. With 50% casualties capturing territory you'd have to hold against resentful population. Garrett's attention shifted to Rachel, his nostrils flaring as he processed her scent markers that confirmed Alpha bloodline despite human appearance. And who are you to speak at Alpha negotiations? Crown Princess Rachel Blackwood, heir to Northern Rockies. The succession crisis you thought you could exploit just got resolved, which means invading now accomplishes what exactly? You take territory, but the bloodline continues. The pack has legitimate leadership that will resist occupation for generations. You'll spend decades bleeding wolves to hold ground you could access through trade agreements that benefit both packs. The tactical assessment landed with weight that Garrett couldn't dismiss. His eyes narrowed as he calculated revised outcomes based on information Warren Hayes hadn't provided because the conspiracy had been exposed before plans could adapt. What kind of trade agreements, access to northern timber routes you've wanted for years? Shared hunting grounds during winter months when prey populations migrate through our territory. Economic partnerships that make both packs stronger instead of weakening each other through conflict. And in exchange, you acknowledge my legitimacy as heir. Pull your forces back from Dead Man's Pass. Establish formal alliance that includes provisions for intermarriage between families looking to strengthen bloodlines. Your pack hasn't produced Alpha Prime in 30 years. We just discovered my daughter Sophie carries those genetics despite being 6 years old. Garrett's entire demeanor shifted as the implications penetrated. Alpha Prime bloodline was rare enough that access to breeding population carrying those genetics justified strategic alliances that went beyond simple territory claims. The girl I've heard rumors about, human appearance, wolf abilities. She's really Alpha Prime. Sophie stepped from behind Marcus, her small voice carrying across clearing, with confidence that transcended her age. I can prove it if you want. But Mama says demonstrations of power are less impressive than demonstrations of control. So instead, I'll tell you that you're scared, that your pack is dying slowly and you thought invading would save them. But alliances save more lives than conquests. The casual assessment delivered by 6-year-old child stunned Garrett into silence. His eyes flickered amber as his wolf responded to challenge from bloodline that registered as superior despite the age gap. Marcus seized the moment, pressing advantage that Rachel's strategy had created. We're offering you survival through partnership instead of destruction through warfare. Warren Hayes sold you intelligence about our supposed weakness, but that intelligence was wrong because he didn't know my daughter existed. Now you're committed to invasion that won't achieve your objectives. Take the alliance. Make this a beginning instead of an ending. Garrett studied the three faces across from him, aging Alpha, who'd ruled for 30 years, human-appearing princess who just won combat trial, and 6-year-old child who carried genetic potential his pack desperately needed. The tactical calculation was obvious, even through the rage that came from being manipulated by conspirators who'd overestimated Northern Rocky's vulnerability. What guarantees do I have that you'll honor these agreements? That this isn't just buying time while you rebuild defenses? Pack law requires binding oaths witnessed by both territories. Break the alliance, face combined judgment from every alpha within 500 miles. Binding oaths couldn't be dismissed without triggering diplomatic catastrophe that would isolate violators from trading partnerships in mutual defense pacts that sustain pact territories. Garrett's jaw worked as he processed offer that solved his underlying resource crisis while saving lives. He'd have lost an invasion that might not succeed. His wolf wanted blood and dominance. His alpha mind recognized strategic victory disguised as diplomatic compromise. I accept, conditional on verification that the girl actually carries Alpha Prime genetics in formal terms drafted by representatives from both packs. Marcus extended his hand in gesture that transcended pack politics into personal commitment between alphas. The handshake sealed agreement that would reshape territorial relationships for generations. The 3 days of negotiations that followed established framework for alliance that gave Garrett access to resources his pack needed while preserving Northern Rocky's sovereignty. Sophie submitted to genetic testing that confirmed her Alpha Prime status beyond dispute. And Rachel demonstrated political acumen that impressed even skeptical advisors who'd initially questioned human princess's capability to lead. When Garrett finally withdrew his forces and formal alliance documents were signed, Marcus stood with Rachel watching the last eastern ridges wolves disappear over the horizon. You saved hundreds of lives today. Turned enemy into ally through diplomacy I wouldn't have considered before you showed up. Rachel touched the medallion at her throat, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's legacy settling across her shoulders. Mom always said the strongest choice wasn't the most violent one. I just applied her wisdom to the situation that needed it. The coronation happened 1 week later, with representatives from all 5 neighboring territories attending to witness formal acknowledgement of Rachel as crown princess and Sophie as heir designate. The ceremony blended traditional pack rituals with adaptations that recognized Rachel's human heritage, creating precedent for future leaders who might bridge multiple worlds. Sophie stole the show by howling during the formal oath-taking, her Alpha Prime voice resonating through the great hall with power that made every wolf present instinctively bare their throats in submission. At 6 years old, she demonstrated command abilities that most alphas never achieved, genetic potential that justified every strategic calculation that had shaped the alliance with Garrett. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, pack members from across the territory coming to meet their new princess and marvel at the child who would one day rule them. Mrs. Thornton, the head housekeeper, who'd initially treated Rachel with suspicion, became fierce defender after witnessing the combat trial. Cole Brennan, defeated in sanctioned combat, served as captain of Rachel's personal guard with loyalty born from respect rather than obligation. But the moment that mattered most to Rachel came late on the third night, when the celebrations had finally wound down and the castle had settled into quiet that preceded dawn. She found Marcus in the gallery, standing before Elizabeth's portrait, his expression holding grief that 26 years hadn't healed. She would be proud of you, of what you've built here, of how you protected Sophie and fought for our place in the pack. Marcus's voice came rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. I failed her, let her be driven into exile because I didn't see threats from people I trusted. Everything that happened, her death, your suffering, Sophie's, that's on me. Rachel stood beside him, studying the portrait that captured her mother's strength beneath gentleness. Or maybe she made the choice she needed to make to keep me alive. And maybe that choice, as painful as it was, led to this moment where her daughter stands acknowledged, and her granddaughter will lead this pack into future she couldn't have imagined. You're more generous than I deserve. I'm practical. Dwelling on past failures accomplishes nothing except paralyzing present decisions. You've given Sophie and me a home, a family, a future. That's what matters now. Marcus pulled her into an embrace that combined paternal affection with alpha approval. The pack bonds that had been denied for 26 years finally acknowledged and celebrated. Rachel leaned into him, feeling the safety that came from knowing she'd earned her place through combat and strategy rather than simply inheriting it through blood. Sophie appeared in the doorway, wearing a nightgown that dragged on the floor, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Mama Grandma came to me again, in my dreams. Rachel knelt to Sophie's level, concerned despite the matter-of-fact delivery. What did she say, sweetheart? That the poison flower served its purpose, that loss became strength, and pain became wisdom, that we're exactly where we're supposed to be, and she's at peace knowing we're safe. The message carried Elizabeth's voice clearly enough that Rachel could almost hear her mother speaking. The wolf's bane flower that had represented danger and exile had transformed into protection and belongings, a medallion that warned of threats, now marking Rachel as legitimate heir to legacy her mother had protected through decades of sacrifice. Marcus reached down, lifting Sophie into his arms with gentleness that contradicted his reputation for brutal efficiency. Tell her we're taking care of each other now, that her sacrifice wasn't wasted, that her bloodline will lead this pack for generations because of choices she made when everything was darkness and fear. Sophie's eyes closed as exhaustion finally claimed her small body, going limp in Marcus's arms with trust that came from knowing she was protected by family that would die before letting harm reach her. The three of them stood in the gallery surrounded by portraits of Alpha's past, while dawn light began painting the eastern windows with colors that promised new day. Rachel touched the medallion at her throat, feeling its warmth that might have been imagination, or might have been her mother's spirit offering blessing from beyond the grave. The castle stirred with morning activity, pack members beginning daily routines in territory that had survived coordinated assault through combination of luck and leadership that emerged when most needed. Northern Rockies would face new threats in the future. Warren Hayes hadn't been seen since his exile, and rumors suggested he was gathering dissenters who rejected human bloodlines and alpha succession. But today that threat felt distant. Today Rachel stood acknowledged as crown princess with father who'd lost 26 years, but found family when he'd accepted that some things were worth fighting for regardless of political cost. Today Sophie slept safe in arms of grandfather who would tear apart anyone foolish enough to threaten his granddaughter. Today, the lost Luna's daughter had come home, claimed her birthright through blood and steel, and proven that Elizabeth's sacrifice had not been wasted, but had instead planted seeds that would grow into legacy stronger than any single lifetime could contain. The wolf's bane flower, poisonous and beautiful, had fulfilled its purpose exactly as intended.